I have to give you my consent first. Okay. I consent. Okay. So, topic this week, personality types and gaming, specifically video gaming. Um, so my initial thinking on this was mainly around are there any kind of correlations or causations between your personality and what kind of video game you play, whether you play video games at all, and maybe within even each video game, like what style do you play, right? Like an RPG, you playing a healer, tank, Overwatch, same kind of deal. In League, are you playing top, mid bot? So all of us have played video games. Most of you are pretty bad at them, Kevin. And so just wanted to get you guys' thoughts on what you've noticed.
Well, I guess for me, I the healer tank like damage kind of roles that you mentioned just now. Overwatch is the first game for me that's been like that, and so that sort of identity in games is I don't know, it's still kind of new to me, but it was definitely one of the first things I noticed when I started playing, like different roles that we would all kind of be inclined to play. Like kind of in my head, it seems like Kevin really likes damage and tank, and then healer is not usually something that's not his first choice, right? And then I think same for Uche, like he also likes those roles. Whereas like J Kim, I asked him and he has like healer first and then tank and then DPS, which is damage per second, right? And yeah, I don't know what it says about our personalities. I do find it interesting I mean it's something new to me that I discovered that like, oh, this, we all like certain roles and stuff. But yeah, I don't know, maybe somebody's more familiar with that kind of distinction between people. Do you I don't know, see anything about like Kevin and Uche that might make them more inclined to be DPS or DPS and tank versus being a healer?
Uchi's like a tank in real life. So
But what about Kevin? Does that apply to Kevin?
So something, I don't know, at least within Overwatch, like the most fun I've had, as well as League, um, I've always gravitated toward like high damage roles. And if there is a relationship between personality and that role, for me, I think it comes from the fact that I love attention and approval, right? And those are usually the most highly visible if you make a big play and kill everyone, or you get fed and you're like the focal piece of your team, right? So at least for me, like I don't even consciously go toward that, right? I tried out everything in Overwatch, and consistently I just was like having the most fun on like DPS, right? And even when I'd like spaz out, get like a multi-kill, everyone would be like, "Good job, Alan!" Oh, dude, that shit's like cocaine. Hits me real hard in the dopamine sensors. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that felt really good. And maybe there's similar things for the different classes. I don't know. What do y'all think?
Well, so since Osmond referenced me in particular, I could explain how why I choose tank and DPS over healer. I feel like the both healer is the more reactive role out of all of these, and I don't like to be on the back foot if I can, because and it's got to do with this whole idea that right, you guys mentioned the other day Uchi is a good shot caller, right? I don't know if I agree with that statement entirely, but the key is I do feel like it's important that the people who are on tank or DPS are good shot callers because they're the more proactive side of the team. Um, so I feel like in our cohort, the people I play with, I prefer to play DPS tank because there's a little bit more agency, especially in quick play. But on competitive, I actually don't like playing DPS because I feel like there's too much pressure on me because I'm not that good, as Alan pointed out. And it's crucially important that the DPS knows what they're doing and can get shit done. Otherwise, the rest of the team can't really move forward. Same with the tank roles, right? So it's all about kind of, to me, it's kind of, it so happens that the people I play with, I feel like I could do the most work for the team in those two roles. But on teams where I feel like we have very competent tank, very competent DPS, like in some ways I feel like it's easier for me the healer or support here and kind of just make it happen. So to me, it's not so much I like a particular role. I like to see a team working well together. So I will assess the situation, feel like what's missing, and I will try to fill that. That's kind of how I view it. And this kind of goes beyond just games. I feel like in social situations, I have a tendency to kind of change like how I behave in a sense to accommodate kind of what the group dynamic is missing. Like I feel like that's important to having time with whatever group you're working with.
Yeah, I think I'm the newest to Overwatch, I think, of anyone here. I've played the least so far, so I'm still getting the hang of it. And I've found myself really avoid tank, like kind of instinctually, and I'm trying to figure out my aversion to it, right? Because I don't know, there's something about like how you're up front the entire time as tank, and like I feel like there's this like weight of responsibility on people who play tank to kind of like be the first line of defense, right? That really stresses me out. I'm like, I'm gonna do that. Right? So I choose it during role selection. I'm always either healer or damage, and usually I play healer more, which I enjoy. I especially enjoy Mercy for some reason. I think there's an appeal to being like the kind of strategic support where you're always like identifying a problem and going out to solve it, as opposed to being more proactive or more reactive in the case of like tanks and damage. Yeah, but no, I've definitely noticed like there's a breakdown between personality types and like what people prefer to play. I think maybe my less extroverted personality lends myself to more like background and supporting roles, maybe. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out like where my preferences lie in the game since I'm so new to it.
Well, so Casey is like an exceptional tank. And you know, I wouldn't say he's like strictly introverted because he's definitely like hanging out with people, but
Yeah.
you know, Casey's definitely a little more reserved. But when you say like, oh, that like upstanding role, the person who stays in front, right? He's like really good at just staying up front with the shield, tanking all the damage for us. And in his friendships and relationships, I notice he's like really self-sacrificial, right? Like I can probably count on one hand, maybe one finger, the number of times when we were roommates where he would ask me to do anything. Where he'd be like, "Oh, can we turn off the lights sooner? Can we, you know, turn the temperature different? Can we, you know, do this on the weekend or clean up this way?" Like literally, dude would just never ask me, and I don't know whether he was like self-sacrificing, like getting it over it, or whether he just didn't care, you know. But he, you know, I think when I've noticed with him, he's just always willing to take like the brunt of it, and that's also what he said too. I think in different situations, right? So I wonder if that has any relationship with his willingness to like absorb bullets for us in games, you know, like actually, right? He's okay with dying or getting hurt if the team can win, right?
Yeah, I feel like. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick interjection. I have always been amazed by the damage absorbed numbers that they show after the match for KC. So a couple of games I observed his kind of actions in game a little bit, and I will not to again disparage him in any way. I will say that he absorbs a lot of unnecessary damage in the sense that he has his formulation of how to play Reinhardt is very much kind of I want as much shield time up as possible, which makes sense in principle, but a lot of times it feels like he's kind of has the shield up and he is absorbing damage. It's kind of like that's it, right? Like strategically he didn't have to be there to absorb the damage. Like we could have, because he wasn't actually defending anyone in particular at that moment. So it's kind of like I would point to more the fact that not so much he's wants to be in the front and sacrificial. I would say that perhaps his choice of playing tank, specifically Reinhardt, is because he can be very effective if you kind of play it in a very formulaic manner, right? Like have the shield up anytime it's possible, and then when it's down, you do very specific things, and by the time you do those things, you can go back to the shield. Very clear cut, right? And it does a lot for the team. So kind of, I wanted to add that extra dimension into.
Yeah, and I think, I think when it comes to like when we think like from the game designing side, right? Like clearly game designers put different pathways to victory, different roles, different playing styles to accommodate how people like to play games, right? Like even if you play like grand strategy games where most of the time you'll play on your own, like Justin, you have City Skylines in your background, right?
SimCity, but
SimCity.
same
My
concept,
mistake,
yeah.
right? Yeah, same. Like some people probably like to build nightmare towns where their citizens are being tormented over and over. Justin likes to build like a very efficient economy and make everything perfect.
Yeah.
In Civ, right? There's multiple win conditions. You can have the domination victory, the science victory, political victory, right? In League, it funnels all the toxic people to the jungle, and it funnels all the wimpy people to support. Right? It's very formulaic, right? And I think that comes from people's acknowledgement that like the way you express yourself through a video game is maybe, I don't know if it's consistent across games, but like it's related to something intrinsic within you, right? And what can that be other than maybe personality or intelligence? Probably less intelligence, because Kevin's really smart, and again, he's terrible at video games.
So what are you guys' thoughts on gaming as a mode of expression then? Like kind of like ways to express your personal identity. Like do you think it's almost like an art form in that way, to like as like an outlet, like a creative outlet for you guys?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my background is obviously like a reference to this, right? Like I think of all the games I've played in my life, SimCity 4, which is the game in the back, is like hands down what I put the most time into. You probably, if you like counted up all the hours I've spent in it as a kid, as a teenager, and as an adult, it's probably like thousands of hours. Like hands down, no other video game will come close to this game. And it's because it's like, for me, I have this interest in like urban planning and stuff. It's like the perfect outlet for my interests and like creativity in that field, right? Like there's no other like form of media where I can like get to like build a city and simulate it, the traffic and the economy and everything. I mean, yeah, there's no other, like I could draw a city, sure, but it doesn't like simulate one, right? So yeah, for me, I've always used video games in that sense, which is probably why I'm bad at like strategy games and shooters and stuff, is because I never picked up video games to like achieve the goal of like winning a competition or something. It was always more of a creative outlet.
So have you ever leveraged your interest in SimCity as like, like really kind of conceptualizing it as like art that you can maybe showcase even to other people? Like I feel like with art, like art that you create, I feel like that's naturally something that you might like perform, right? Like, I don't know, if you had like a piece of painting, you would put it up on a wall or something like that, or like a piece of music is something that you could perform. And so
when I was younger,
do that with video games.
When I was younger and I played SimCity 4 a lot, there were like forums that are still out there where like people would share like, their cities and take screenshots, and kind of like a lot of people go really far with it and have like their own fantasy, like nations, with entire like stories and histories and like really intricate stuff. And I never got that far into it, but I definitely like, posted on those forums and kind of shared what I had created. So it was definitely a form of art.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because like I think you'll see that a lot, right? People will share their Sims creations, their Spore creations, Civ, the monstrous things people do in Stellaris, right? And it feels like there is a not necessarily genre, but there are a lot of games that lend themselves more to like creative expression, like those games, right? And then when we look at like more esports kind of games, I feel like that becomes more of a competitive form of expression, right? Like you can play The Witcher 3 and you look at it, and that was the first game that convinced me. I was like, damn, video games are like an art form. Like that game is incredible, right? And when you play it, the joy isn't in beating people, it's in exploring the world, it's in, creating a character or a story that you think makes sense. But in Overwatch and League, I don't know if I can speak for y'all, the joy isn't in winning, it's in making other people lose. And I think everyone who enjoys multiplayer games knows that feeling. And even if they don't want to admit it, right? Because you're like, okay, if I could put you in a game with AI and they play exactly the same as people, would you have fun? Hell no, you wouldn't have fun. You wouldn't know that there's some like 12-year-old on the other line crying his eyes out because you shot him the moment he spawned. You know, there is a joy in beating other people in those games, and that's the competitive expression.
Yeah, I don't know if I can empathize with that. I think I could have. I actually played some AI games on Overwatch the other day. I had a lot of fun. Yeah, I mean, we were working as a team. I actually decided to play some Mercy. Like, everybody was like lined up as like DPS, and then I was like the one healer, like healing everybody. And then I don't know. I mean, it was yeah. I certainly don't see. But I just like what draws me to Overwatch is not necessarily beating a 12-year-old.
What draws you? No, I mean, it could be 12, it could be 50.
Yeah.
What draws you?
I like the teamwork aspect of it. What Kevin mentioned earlier about like having a good team working together is definitely very satisfying. I mean, a lot of that I think goes with having a good team composition of like characters, but also people. You have a shot caller, but you can all be shot callers, right? Like you need leaders and followers. I don't know. I mean, it kind of like like the group dynamic. When you have like 6 people like that, it's difficult to acquire like a good group dynamic. And when you have like 6 people who are willing to work together and leaders who kind of step into their roles, it's definitely a very satisfying thing to be a part of. Yeah.
It feels like you get into a flow state, right? Like whenever you have that like perfect teamwork and you're like killing it on objectives and everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely feel like that with like at least recently with Overwatch, having like KC like as an anchor, like with his Reinhardt. Like I like to play Lucio, who's like he's like a local healer, like he heals people around him. And so I mentioned team comp. I mean that's just one team comp that I think has really sort of like vibed with me. Like he's like the anchor, and then I'm just standing behind him, healing him the whole time, kind of making him die slower. And so it's just that sort of synergy I feel like is it's satisfying to get. And yeah, that's really why I like these games. So I guess you also mentioned the like competitive aspect of it and like how it might like lose out on its art form as a result of it becoming more competitive.
I don't know if it's loses out, but I just think the primary mode
it sounded like it was a
expression.
trade-off almost though. Like, I mean, once it becomes more competitive, then like you might, I don't know, lose out on the artistic aspect that you might get in like Sims or Civ or I don't know whatever other like world building game. So I just wanted to bring up like the idea of like that made me think of like ice skating and gymnastics, right? Like,
yeah, I was about to say.
In a vacuum, these are very like I think artistic kind of like activities, right? But then you go to the Olympic level and it's raw competition. I mean, the length that these people go to like be the best at what they are doing, right? Like whatever the hell the Chinese do like in gymnastics, like it's it almost loses its like artistic side and like becomes more competitive. And so that made me think like, is there, I mean, you would like to think that it's not like give and take, right? That it's not like a trade-off, but I mean that kind of makes me think that it is.
I think with like skating and gymnastics, I mean, but the competitive aspect does take into account how like artistic it is, right? Like they take into account how like technically beautiful it is, which I guess goes back to like, can you quantify how artistic or beautiful something is?
Mm-hmm.
Like, should that be a part of a competition? I don't know.
Well, I think the better comparison is like ice skating or something like that to basketball, right? Like in the games we're talking about, like you have Overwatch where it's standardized, right? You have to play from a certain set of characters and you have to like play within a certain like set of stages or maps or whatever you want to call them. And none of that is customizable, right? There's no way you can mod that because everybody has to be on the same playing field in order for it to be a fair competition. But like The Sims or SimCity or some other game like that is completely open-ended. There is no win condition at all, right? It's completely individualistic and moddable, right? Like the screenshot I have in the background, all of those buildings are mods. I can tell you, being familiar with the game, even the roads are mods, right? None of it is included in the base game because it's just like such a player-driven experience and it's not meant to be competitive. There's no need to standardize it or limit people on what they can do. So I think there's a correlation. It might not be direct, right? Like you could play Civilization where, there is a competitive aspect and there's like some standardization, but you can still like make your own country and civilization and kind of play it out and give it a narrative if you want to and have your own play style. But, there is some trade-off, right? In order for things to be a fair competition, they have to be like restricted so that you can't customize them.
I thought the main difference between, say, basketball and ice skating is just how much head-to-head interaction you have. That's why it's a basketball game, not an ice skating game. Like with ice skating, it's your performance, right? It's just ultimately after you're done with your performance, your performance will be assessed against someone else's performance. But the performance itself is your own. But LeBron James's performance in a basketball game is dependent on his opponents and his teammates. It's not something. It's kind of.
Well, some people would argue that not. That's all I'm saying.
So that kind of raises a question, right? Like, is playing a game like The Sims, where there's no win condition and you're not playing against anyone, is that a game?
Yeah, 100% it's a game, right? Solitaire's a game. Right? Oh, I guess there's a win condition.
There's a win condition,
Yeah, that's fair.
But I mean, Kevin, you just said, like they call it a basketball game, but they don't call it an ice skating game. There's clearly some difference in the definition there.
Well, so to me, the game depends on kind of whether you conceptualize an opponent kind of existing contemporaneously with you during the kind of the moment of the primary activity, right? So in ice skating, I would say the answer is no, because your opponent isn't doing anything that can impact you in any way whatsoever, kind of while you are kind of performing, right? Basketball is not. There is a very clear opponent that can directly impact you, right? So, and I want to kind of expand on this point later, but I have this idea of kind of, we're talking about art. A kind of a less interactive game, I would say, is more of a kind of a static art, whereas a game where you have a lot of interactions with other competing entities, that's a more fluid art, right? So in Civ, right, where you don't necessarily have human opponents, but you have computer opponents kind of fill that role, right? So I mean, that's kind of more of a gray area. It's like, are they really impacting you, or are they just an environmental factor, right? But that's kind of a mindset, right? But it's kind of like, I will say that relative to ice skating, right? Like the AIs and Civ, right? Even if you treat them as an environmental factor, they do seem to have an agenda, right? And that agenda will interact with your own agenda. Whereas in an ice skating rink, I don't think anyone would say the ice has an agenda, nor would they say any of the equipment there, right? So it's more about you and what you want, rather than kind of how does what you want interplay with what other entities want in that kind of same universe.
So what is your response to, Justin mentioned Sims, and I think another good example is Minecraft, like those examples where you can just be by yourself and you just build. But I would also think I would call Minecraft a game, Sims a game.
I think Justin makes a good point. Upon thinking about his question, I don't think those are games. Not in at least the way we've traditionally defined them, right? Like obviously they're video games, right? Well, no. I think what Justin said about the win condition makes sense, right? Like, if you see two people playing tennis at the court, they're playing tennis, right? But they don't play a game until they decide that one of them can win or lose, right? Same thing with ping pong. Same thing with any game, right?
Let's play a game. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Right. Right. Exactly. So you're playing something. You're playing a game, but like, yeah, I don't know if you'd necessarily call that experience a game, right? You'd call it video gaming, which is, I think, a bit different, right? There's that nuance where a game really is someone has to win, someone has to lose.
And I guess if we want to tie this back to our initial topic, right, there's obvious connections to like how this ties into people's personalities, right? Like if you're a person who avoids conflict and you kind of like cooperation and harmony, right, you're going to be attracted to a game like Minecraft or SimCity, right, where there's, the conflict is up to you. If you want to destroy your city, that's fine. It's up to you. But there's no like antagonistic force that's going to force you into some unpleasant interaction, right? Which is like, for me, you know, I never liked playing League. Like in high school, I tried to get into it. I had friends who really like encouraged me and they played with me, and I hated it. And I think it's because it's so antagonistic and toxic. It's toxic, right? And I'm like, my personality
So
type
toxic.
is not conducive to that, right? Like I like Overwatch because I think it's a milder environment and the focus is more on the teamwork and like what you're doing within your team than necessarily the
What we
personalities of
should've
your
been.
opponents. Yeah. But yeah, like I have a limit, right? When it comes to like conflict in games. And I think it reveals itself in what I've chosen to play.
So what do you guys think is so clearly there's a very like deep stemming reason the way like why we play the way we do or what games we play, right? And then in its relation to real games, and the Ozzy's thought like of the Ozzy's topic about what he enjoys out of Overwatch got me thinking about this. But when you guys watch any traditional sport that's not an esport, what do you guys really like to see? Like what part really draws you or excites you?
Well, for me, I have two parts. One aspect is kind of personal excellence for a particular athlete, right? Kind of relative to his competitors, right? Like, what is he or she able to do, right? In terms of just skill expression, like how skilled is this player, especially with sports like basketball and volleyball, which I've personally played before. I have a very personal benchmark as how difficult it is to execute certain things, right? And I'm like, wow, if this guy could or this person could do this, like that's just a lot of respect, right? So that's one thing I enjoy. That's kind of more from the performance aspect. And I also really appreciate games that I can really get into the meta game of. Like I can appreciate kind of what the thinking and the strategy is, right? Because it's kind of like a secondary game being played at the team level, not just kind of at the individual one-on-one matchup. So that's kind of, but that's true for like games, non-traditional sports. So I kind of appreciate the two in the same way.
I think for me, the first thing that came to mind was watching a good game, like where the game is competitive and the teams are really going at it. Because I feel like it's in those kind of like environments where like the teams are equally matched, where everybody's really like engaged with it now. Like when it's like lopsided, like you know, I'm watching basketball or something, and like if it's a lopsided game, even if my team is winning, like I feel like I would just turn off the TV, right? Like because it's just not interesting to watch. But like if it's competitive, like wire to wire, like the teams are really going at it. That's something that I find really like I don't know, beautiful about sports. Like I just like when it gets to that like really like these teams are so evenly matched, and like it gets really tense at like the end of the fourth quarter or something. Like that's kind of what really gets me hyped. And like you know really, really big clutch plays at the end of games and stuff. Like you need that. Like that always happens in like you know when teams are evenly matched and it's like a competitive game. That's something that I enjoy. And I think that's something that I enjoy in Overwatch too. Like, you know, when we just like steamroll the opponents, it's like, well, what do we really do here? Like, we just beat up on some like 10-year-olds. Like, okay, great. But it's like a competitive match that there's a lot of back and forth. You don't know who's going to win. Like it's sort of that narrative that really attracts me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that your focus is on the teams because I feel like mine, at least in sports, and the sports that I've enjoyed watching, and I know like I'm not a known consumer.
Yeah, but what do you
sports, enjoy? But I don't know. I think I really focus on like individual ability when I like enjoy a sports clip or something, right? Like I can think of baseball, where you know like I'll watch like a really good pitcher, right, in the World Series, or someone who's like hitting these ridiculous home runs, and I'll just be in awe of like their incredible ability, right? I remember, I can't remember his name, but the pitcher when the Astros won the World Series and they pitched their last game against the Dodgers, and like the pitcher for the Astros like held out for like 4 innings or something, just with these incredible pitches, right? They were like a form of art. It's like perfect dead on every time. And I thought that was incredible. And it was like really engaging. Or like Tiger Woods, like throughout his entire career, like an athlete that I really look up to. Like you watch what this man achieves and like pulls off time and time again. Like these like getting these holes that are just like mind blowing, right? Defies the laws of physics. And I think that like really impresses me. And I've never been as engrossed by like the team aspect. It's really about like these standout athletes who are like at the top of their game, and they're just like on another level. They're not even human, right?
You
And
should
that's
watch The
just-
Last
it's-
Dance. I feel like The
I
Last
heard a
Oh,
lot
the-
about
the-
it. Yeah.
The basketball propaganda piece by Michael Jordan.
Yeah, no, but I mean, as far as because what are you gonna like advertise about Michael Jordan? The fact that he is like an amazing individual performer that really like commits himself to his craft, and I feel like that's kind of like what's
No, I
I
think
mean-
you're probably right that I would enjoy it if I had to watch a sports documentary.
Yeah.
It's probably
Yeah.
one I would enjoy.
No, I definitely agree the most with like Justin's enjoyment of sports. And I'd say that the aspect I enjoy watching most is dominance, right? Not necessarily even just excellence, but dominance and very visible dominance, right? Like, so the parts of what you said really appealed to me, right? Like seeing Michael Jordan like make incredible shots, right? Outwork his opponents, outjump them, watching Shaq dunk on 4 dudes, incredible to see, right? I love watching like highlight clips of any sport except sports like baseball, where I feel like it's just not as visible when you dominate people. Like, yeah, you'll hit a home run, but like you're just hitting a home run that, you know, a high schooler could do. But a high schooler could not do what some of these like other incredible athletes are doing to other athletes, right? There was a clip on Reddit today of Lionel Messi just, you know, running and dribbling a ball past like 7 soccer players and scoring, just making them look like idiots, you know? And like to Osman's point, right? I totally disagree. I don't think blowout games are not entertaining. I think they're the best when I play them and when I watch them, right? Because you're just seeing such a gulf of skill between the top tier and people who are even maybe just considered slightly below them, right? Like, and that's why like people, I think, at least in America, love watching like Conor McGregor, right? This guy is like, he would go up against insane fighters and he would just make them look like idiots, right? Whereas I think there wouldn't be that mystique around him or like Michael Jordan or Shaq if it looked like there was kind of a close competition, right? If people looked like they could challenge them each time, right? And I think as far as that goes, yeah, the team aspect doesn't matter to me at all.
No,
Right,
I
but then-
definitely, I agree with your point. Like, you got to remember, I'm going to keep going back to Tiger Woods because I feel like of any like YouTube compilations I've watched, I've probably watched more Tiger Woods than anything else. Like,
You got to
this
link me
man-
some.
you know, every year he was playing in competitions with the greatest golfers in the world, and he just completely steamrolled them every time. Like, he ran over them. Like, it wasn't even close. He just, like, his ability was on such a different level that, like, he was a prodigy. And I don't know, just to watch it and how, like, he single-handedly took this sport, which was just a bunch of older white people, you know, who played it for like 50 years and made it into something completely different.
Yeah,
I
it
don't
became
know, it's just
athletic
so-
because of him, right?
Yeah, it's so compelling, you know, and I couldn't feel the same way about like a really good NFL team. Like, yeah, that's cool, but Tiger Woods, Tiger Woods single-handedly changed golf.
See, I can appreciate kind of both the team aspect and the personal aspect, but in particular, the thing I love the most is the interplay between the two. Because I love, and that's why I like team sports in particular, because there's room for personal skill expression, but I also love to see kind of the interplay between how far can your personal excellence take you and your team, and how much can the coordination of the team kind of maybe even overshadow that sometimes. Like, which one wins out? Is it kind of the coordinated efforts of like a strong solidarity, or is it kind of a one-star player kind of carrying the team, right? Like, which wins out? And like, it's different. There's no consistent answer, and that's what kind of, to Osman's point about suspense, right? Like, blowout games, there's no suspense because like you can appreciate that one player is like awesome, like wow, he's just like taking a shit on like everyone else in the game, right? But it's kind of like there's no suspense, and I don't get to see that interplay. I don't get to see the other team trying to like get their act together and like, counter this. Like, how far can we counter this superstar through kind of coordinated effort? Like, I don't get to see that, so it almost feels like I still appreciate the kind of the skill expression, but I feel like there's something missing. Right? Because in the games that are competitive, I can still see excellent skill expression, right? Because like in basketball, like a close game, there's still amazing plays where like one player will completely shit stop another, right? But kind of there's still this overall air of suspense, and I can kind of see, again, the interplay between strategy versus personal skill. Like, that's kind of what makes it the most exciting story for me.
Question for Ozzy. You mainly emphasize like the team aspect, right? Which I think is consistent with what you enjoy in Overwatch, like you said. But you're also the person here besides me who most enjoys, I think, seeing an MMA match, right? Just turning it on, watching. But there is no team aspect. Right. So I guess where do you get your enjoyment there? Is it just the spectacle of fighting, or do you find aspects that you enjoy from other sports there?
Hmm. Um, let's see. I mean, I guess I don't want it to like mislead people and think that like I don't enjoy the individual excellence. I mean, Tiger Woods was one of my favorite athletes growing up until I mean shit kind of hit the fan, and I don't know, we don't need to talk about the bad stuff. But you know, Tiger Woods, Michael Phelps, and like if I was alive at the time, Michael Jordan, I think I would have been enamored with, right? So like the individual excellence is certainly like awesome, and like I see that in MMA, right? Like it's just like wow, these guys like it's I mean just the yeah, the individual excellence, the speed, power, just like sometimes just the like competitive grit that these men show. Like it's like so like personally visible. Like you see these men's full bodies, like not just their faces, but just like their overall demeanor and like what they're doing to another person. Yeah, it's like it's awesome, right? But um but still again I kind of want to emphasize that like yeah, like what Kevin was saying with the suspense, the I think the narrative of the game.
The narrative is a huge part, 100%.
Yeah, like you know, like I don't know, you end the game of Overwatch and you send like GG to the other team. I really like it when it's like truly been like a good game, like you know, handshake, good job opponent. That was satisfying, and I'm glad that like we played this game against each other, right? Like that's really what I like to watch and see, and I think that's what I've found really satisfying. And so yeah, I mean the connection to like a narrative. I mean like you know games have a story to them, right? Like there's like
Yeah, what happens outside the game, I think makes it even more exciting to watch it. Because if it's two no-name teams, for me, it doesn't matter how exciting it is. I'm kind of like, okay, that was cool. I'll forget about it, right? But when it's like two guys that hate each other, ooh,
yeah, maybe. I mean, I watched Walter, Kevin's brother, play volleyball once, and I mean, when we're talking about no-name teams, like this is you know random high school no-name volleyball
toxic,
team.
bro.
It was still very fun to watch. I mean, I guess.
Well, you cared because you were invested, right?
I
you
cared
had
because I knew Walter. Probably.
Exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't remember the game being that competitive, but I remember Walter was kind of like, I felt like he was kind of like the ace on the team. It was like he was, or he kind of thought he was at the hot shot, and
was he the hot shot?
I mean, it seemed
You're
like he was
toxic.
making
You're
the
an
most. He was a big part of the team for sure. Whether he always executed was, I don't know, kind of a question mark. There was a reason their team didn't win, right?
Oh my god! All right, Kevin, we're recording this. Are you gonna show this to Walter?
I'll make the link available. I think it's fair point.
All right, timestamp it. It's gonna be what is this like the 50-minute mark,
Maybe,
40-something minute mark?
But yeah, definitely engaging with the narrative. You know, be it somebody that I know or like, I mean, I think you know the narrative of the game itself, right? Like the back and forth, like who's gonna win, like that's always exciting. And I mean, the narrative of like personal excellence and dominance is also, I think, very alluring. And so, but yeah, I guess.
And the beef. You can't forget the beef.
Yeah, I mean, like you know, you see beef a lot in the NBA too. Whatever, like Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook. You know, like Durant left his buddy Westbrook that he had like they were drafted together, and they were like on the Oklahoma City Thunder. They go up 3-1 against the Golden State Warriors, and then they end up losing. And then Durant joins the Warriors the next year. And it's like, bro, I mean, yeah. And so like, you know, I consume all this NBA media, and they like hype up this like big story between them, but like between them, like. Things are chill. Like I feel like you know when they're like talking to each other, they're like things are fine. But then you know little things that like the media will like kind of like blow out of proportions. That kind of makes me eye roll, and I feel like it detracts from the game, right? Like it's almost a distraction sometimes for me. I don't know how you feel about that.
I think it's entertaining. The vast majority I find just really entertaining.
Then it just becomes like a soap opera, and it's like I don't know, like this. It's not what the game is about, right? Like
Well, for some people, that's what it's about. I mean, the game's about competition and entertainment, right? And like competition for the athletes, entertainment for everyone else. And however you get entertained, however you get your rocks off, right? Like, I would love to see a fight break out in the NBA. Like, that would be, like, yeah, it would detract from the game, but it would absolutely spike the entertainment factor.
Yeah. I mean, there's this really big moment from the early 2000s called the Malice in the Palace.
Oh, I saw that video. I
yeah.
watched the entire thing. It was so good.
Or basically, guys, they so there was like a fight between the teams, but then like as the fight was cooling down, somebody from the crowd, the audience, threw something at one of the players, and then he starts a fight with the audience, like the people in the crowd, and he starts going after somebody who's like who didn't actually throw the thing originally, and so it's just this whole mess, and like people were suspended for the whole season, and like
It was an incredible name, like Malice in the Palace.
Yeah. I mean, prior to that, like the NBA was kind of really dealing with this problem of like kind of being like this gangster group, like, you know, people like, I don't know, like it's kind of like a game of the streets almost. Like it's not like a gentleman's game, maybe. Like it was kind of like seen as like I don't know, like kind of a bad boys vibe, and like the NBA didn't want that, and so they actually like they very harshly acted on the Malice at the Palace. You know, like they had like a season-long suspension, which like was kind of unheard of at the time. But they like that really changed like kind of, or like was like I think emblematic of like the NBA saying like we want to stop this kind of behavior, and like we want to dispel of this like kind of perception of the NBA, and we want to be a little bit more, you know, like presentable to like mainstream, I guess.
Yeah, it's respectable, which is kind of weird now because I feel like the NFL now has a lot more controversy, right, with its players than the NBA does.
Yeah, I mean that controversy is more political, right? Are we thinking like Colin Kaepernick?
Well, no, I'm thinking more like on the player level. Don't they have a lot more like DUIs with and like a lot more battery charges, stuff like that? I don't know. I could just be pulling this out of my ass. It's just something I've heard.
Yeah, I don't know. The plenty in the NBA get that too. Yeah, the NBA might be a little bit more strict about it though, because I mean the NBA has really definitely in the last 15 years has tried to make that happen.
Not like esports, the cleanest of the sports. No one's going out DUIing because they're just staying at home gaming with their girlfriend.
Is there toxicity at the highest levels?
Yeah, 100%. People are so toxic. Yeah, there's one guy who's like an incredible talent, and he's been bounced around to almost every team in the North American League, because they're like you know, there's that classic like stereotype of a girlfriend or a wife who's like, I can fix this guy, I can fix this man. You know, no one else has, but that's how every team is with this guy. Like, I can fix him. Gets on their team, ruins the dynamic, causes the team to win or to lose a bunch, and then they suspend him the rest of the season, and then another team buys him. Yeah, so the most recent controversy, the biggest team in North America, their manager was heard in the background of a stream, and she was like, yeah, listen, no one wants Dardoch. No one wants to trade him. And everyone was like super pissed because they were like, number one, like, why are you having this in front of your boyfriend who's a player? Number two, you just ruined his leverage with every other team he could potentially sign with. Right now, they all know no one wants him. They can pay a dirt cheap price, or no one might just sign him, right? But I think someone did end up signing him again, and they're probably going to get the same result. So yeah, lots of toxic people. I mean, like, I think a lot of people say with esports, there's just like a culture where like it's a bunch of people who are playing video games when they're like 15 or 16, start making 6-7 figures immediately, have stayed in their house, haven't really had to interact with like other adults. And most of their interaction comes from Twitch and Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. And so you just have these like sometimes like 25, 26-year-old like man children, right? And who are like incredibly wealthy and successful. And so it's like, where's the impetus for them to change? Where's the impetus to mature? So that sometimes I think creates those weird situations.
So maybe that's a good point where we can like flip the question that we initially asked, right? So we initially talking about how we fit our personalities to different video games, but how about how video games have influenced our personalities? Do you think it's played a role in your personal development?
I think it's a co-evolution, to use kind of like a machine learning term. This idea that it's not that one strictly influences the other, but it's give and take.
Yeah,
you'll play your first game, right, and you'll feel about it, and you know, kind of that changes games, vice versa. And there's going to be an evolution there. It's not just kind of one-sided. Your personality is fixed, and that determines what games you play. Versus like you don't like the games you play kind of just, you know, shape it. It's kind of it. They both change over time.
Oh yeah, I'm sure, but I'm not saying it was a one-way street, but I'm wondering if we have any anecdotes here about, how you played a video game for a long time and you've realized it's changed you in some sort of way.
Short answer: League makes you a worse person. I don't think anyone who's played a ton of League would dispute that. But that's
I feel like it makes me a better person, actually.
now that's League talking to you. It's convinced you that your existing evil and badness is good. That's League making you a worse person.
Wait, why would you say that? I
Because-
feel like I've become so much more tolerant of just people's behavior in general. It's just kind of like before I would get upset about things, and now I just understand this. There's so many different people in this world. I don't think I will ever understand everyone and why they do the things they do. And it's just not meaningful to become angry at this sort of thing. Just try to make the best of it. That's a mentality I've picked up after playing that game, because
I think we should nominate you for the Nobel Peace Prize for being the only person on Earth who
I didn't even make a
believes League
goal
has made
yet.
them a best person.
I haven't even made a goal yet. Okay, maybe I should make some goals first before getting that prize.
Well, yeah, I just think it's an interesting question because, over the past 20 years, there's been a lot of talk about, this idea of violent video games or making our children into school shooters, and this entire narrative that video games are distorting the personalities of young people, right? And I think it's controversial to say that, especially in the video game community. A lot of people will counteract with oh no, video games are not, influential on you at all. But I feel like the truth has to be in the middle somewhere, right?
Yeah.
You say that League makes people worse. I mean, then
No
clearly,
nuance. No
video
nuance.
games do
It's just
influence
worse.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does a game like GTA, Grand Theft Auto, make you more numb to violence, right?
I don't know,
More
right?
accepting of
I
it?
played a lot of GTA 4 when I was a teenager, and I don't know, I feel like it didn't really change me. But then again, I wasn't doing the parts of the game necessarily that were the most controversial.
Yeah,
I was
you were
mostly
probably
playing
driving
multiplayer.
within the speed limit, stopping at the red lights, assisting old ladies across the road.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely never got into the beating up prostitutes or whatever scenarios they put up, because I never did the playthroughs. I always just went into multiplayer or whatever. So I don't know.
Yeah. I recently played GTA 5 for the first time. It was my
'Cause
first
it was
GTA
free,
game.
right?
Yeah, because it was
Yeah.
free. And it's just, it just struck me as so violent. And you're running from the cops, those are the enemies in the little mini map. It's just I don't know. I mean, whether it would actually change someone into turn them into a criminal, it's probably a little much to think that a game would lead to that. But I do think it's part of this maybe normalization of violence that we might see in these kind of games. I don't know. For one thing, I think familiarity with the guns is something that I actually didn't appreciate until Fortnite. I feel like I didn't know what any of these guns were. I didn't know I
They
didn't
were
know
just
that
all
a
machine guns.
I didn't know that a shotgun was for nearby things. I just but I don't know. Everybody that I played with, they all knew what these guns were. They all knew the types of different models. Oh, that's you got your AK, your Uzi. I just a whole bunch of different I don't know. Just everybody seems to know what these guns are, and I don't know if that's I don't think that's a good thing. Is it really mean anything? Maybe not, but I don't know. Is it? It can maybe bring it up in a discussion about gun violence in America. Just it seems all these gamers know all this shit about guns, and it's not really something we should be so educated about.
I think common sense wise, to Justin's point, you definitely feel like it would have an influence, right? If we did a thought experiment, you raise a kid, you raise a few different kids, one of them all day surrounded by pornographic material constantly, right? They're just seeing all this shit no one should see, which a lot of kids are, right, in America. And no one, I don't think any reasonable person would say that's not going to fuck up how they think about sex, how they feel about sex, right? It's gonna play a role. You get another kid, right? You surround them with just normalized animal abuse everywhere, right? Just constant videos, constant people just kicking dogs and shit. Yeah, they're gonna have fucked up ideas about animals. And so, how is it that when we bring kids people doing violence to other people constantly all around them, movies, advertisements, right, video games, right? It's not even just viewing it. You're in video games, you're taking a part of it, right? and we're like, let's let them do this for fucking 10 plus hours a day, right? Most days of the year, nothing's going to change. Those other two kids, they're fucked. But this kid, they're good,
Yeah.
right? Like, reasonably, you wouldn't say so. I don't know if the data points that way, but your intuition definitely says, yeah, this shouldn't be that good for people.
Well, I guess the real question is like, does a normal background level of video games in your life override all of your other environmental conditioning, like what your parents tell you not to kill people or your church tells you not to kill people, And the answer, I think, in a majority of cases is no, not at all,
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
I have an anecdote kind of coming off of Alan's point about kind of, if you kind of see the violence on video games like all day, like you become more willing to do it in real life. And I actually feel like there's a bit of a paradox going on here that I wanted to get you guys' thoughts on, which is kind of this idea that, well, on the one hand, we say that, kind of the violence in the video games kind of desensitizes you to that experience so that you're more willing to kind of perform it in real life, right? But then the folks who actually have done this a lot, really like shooting people, or let's say soldiers and whatnot, right? They come back, their experience, I don't know, I guess soldiers have said that like the training that they go through helps them with the actual act of shooting someone, especially people who attended sniper school, right? Because there's been like a lot of studies about how like snipers have the biggest psychological pressure when they're trying to kill someone because they're shooting from so far away. They know that person is no threat to them, but they're about to end their life, right? But that's a very different psychology than like in Fortnite where you headshot someone, like, oh shit, I just got a headshot from like X meters away. Right? But so to me, the disconnect here I see is that on the one hand, we're saying that, these games are very much simulating this and desensitizing people to the act of violence, right? Yet the people who play video games, they have a very different take coming out of that constant exposure to violence, right? Simulated or otherwise, than people who kind of in real life engage in those in very similar activities, right? So I wonder doesn't that kind of inherently show us that the video games are still very much one step removed from the actual acts that they're trying to simulate, right? Like, and kind of to go along with that, I have an anecdote about my brother, which, I mean, he plays a lot of shooting games, so he kills people all the time on the internet, right? But the other day, for the first time, my dad just took him to a shooting range, and putting a real gun in his hand, live rounds. If he took a video of my brother's hand while he was holding the gun, right? And it was very interesting for me to see because you're supposed to like tighten your grip, like, and like hold it very tightly, right, with your thumb like this. But every time he pulled the trigger, it would startle him. And he knew it would startle him because you would see before he actually pulls the trigger, he would release his entire left hand. It's like his thumb would fly out, right? And then he would pull it, and then he's like, ah, right, So this is something.
He's like, where's the right click? Where's the right click?
Right? So it's still very startling. And so, it's kind of like there's still a pretty big gap, in my view, kind of coming out of this between shooting a bunch of people in a game versus kind of you feel kind of in the moment like, you are about to like kill someone, that person really wants to kill you. Like that's still very different, right? So what I actually feel like the video games have done a lot is this whole concept of the keyboard warrior. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, right? It's people who have all this like, spunk and say, oh, I want to do this, I feel this way, opinionated, but kind of without responsibility attached, right? They kind of just say shit. And that's why a lot of these communities are so toxic. Kind of like, that's why I love the Video Melis show the other day with it's like, this guy like shit talking some other guy about whatever shooter game they're playing. It's like, and then he hears a knock on his door. It's like, oh, you quiet all of a sudden. This not your door we're knocking on, right? And then he just like loses his shit, right? It's kind of like, I mean, I'm not going to say there are no exceptions. Some people like, maybe they just by killing a lot of people in GTA, they feel like, I am ready, and they are ready, like in mentally, right? But I think for the vast majority of people, there's still a very big step move when they realize, like, well, this isn't a game anymore. I'm not respawning in 10 seconds. Like, this is it, right? Like when it's my door being knocked on, like the psyche all of a sudden changes. So like, I don't think it's anywhere close to being able to go all the way. It's like we're going to train an army of psychopaths who just like happily shoot people and like, hey, I got a headshot from 300 meters, right? Like, I don't think video games are capable of doing that.
Yeah, I bet
It does.
Yeah, I bet you if you ran the numbers, like of people who spent a ton of time online and playing games and stuff, it's probably like negatively correlated to their likelihood of actually getting in a physical confrontation. Like there's a really funny story where a UFC heavyweight champ was playing video games and some kid was like shit talking him, like, "Hey, you fucking idiot," throwing slurs and shit. So he like doxed the kid. Like the kid gave him his address. He was like, "You fucking bitch, you won't find me." So the guy goes to his house, knocks on the door, and this guy's like 260 fucking one punch knockout power. It's like a 12-year-old kid. And the champion was like, "Oh shit, now I feel like an idiot." And the kid was obviously like probably shitting his pants.
Yeah. So to Kevin's point, I agree. I totally agree that I feel like games, they're very unlikely, improbable that like it will lead people to make that sort of jump in their lives. I guess the concern that I was trying to voice was more about like what games might normalize, like, when it comes to violence, like having this amount of violence every day and having, like just this, broad knowledge of guns and like like in GTA, just the prevalent violence that is in the game. Like what does that do for like gun discourse in America, right? Like
That's a very good point.
Yeah.
I like, just to kind of respond to that directly. I feel like what this ends up happening is not so much that you have a bunch of people who want to go on the street and start shooting people, but you'll have people who, like in this scenario, they kind of, again, going back to that keyboard warrior kind of trope, where it's kind of like they have very strong and pointed opinions about things that they don't actually know very much about. They feel like
yeah.
they know, right? It's like, oh yeah, it's just a gun. Like, what do you just don't shoot people, right? It's like it doesn't quite feel the same way when it's at school, right?
Yeah.
It's like it, but and actually, if you've played PUBG, for example, like there's a place called school, and you can land there. It's filled with guns, and it really feels like shit when you don't have a gun and the other guy does, and it just kind of like, and the people's like, and it's that mental disconnect, right, from the fact that it's like, oh well, I'll just queue up another game in PUBG, right? But no, we're talking about real people's lives here. They don't get to queue up another one, at least not to my knowledge. Maybe they respawn at a different world that's better than this one, but I don't want to bank on that. I don't think anyone does, right? So it's like you got a bunch of people who are very strongly opinionated in a manner that I feel is perhaps irresponsible, right? Just because they feel like they know, because they've seen something similar, but they don't understand the leap. Whereas someone who's never played a shooter in their life was like, they would recognize probably that I do in fact know nothing about this. Whereas people who play the shooters, they might falsely believe that they know something that's worth kind of having an opinion about.
I think it says something that people say that, in games where we have not Call of Duty, right? Call of Duty, where there's like that famous, really controversial airport scene where like you're killing civilians or something. And then there's there's Grand Theft Auto, where there's constantly terrible stuff. And in that world we live in, where there are those awful video games where you can play serial killers, soldiers, stuff like that, League still makes you the worst person. That just blows my mind. Like unequivocally, like League is the worst.
Yeah, I feel like the influence of games like Call of Duty and whatever are like, it's really focused on a very select few group of vulnerable people who kind of are already going down that road of being crazy and toxic and violent. Like a good example is, you guys remember the shooter in New Zealand, was it last year, 2018? Went into that mosque and killed a bunch of people, and he live streamed it, and he placed his camera on his like head in a way that it looks like it mimicked a first-person shooter, so that like when people watched it, and people made edits of his video where like they added like a UI and like tried to set it up so it looks like an FPS, right? And it was intentional, and he was like really into like video game culture and like online culture. He like referenced PewDiePie when he was doing the shooting. but like obviously, you know, we don't have like an entire country of 15-year-olds who are like on the road to doing the same thing, right? You have one unbalanced individual who was like particularly, you know, violent and already like kind of embedded in this like nationalist white supremacist propaganda, and he was just using his video game knowledge as like a form of expression, like we talked about earlier, right? Yeah, but I mean, I would agree. Yeah, violent video games make us a little desensitized, right? We might be more okay with watching disturbing videos or violent movies and not be as squeamish about it. But that's, yeah, like Kevin is saying, it's like many steps removed from the actual experience of going out and killing people, which I think requires stepping down a few more like levels of depravity. You know, you have to have some other like motivating factors in your life or some sort of mental disorder to really pull the trigger literally, right?
Yeah.
But it is interesting like that some violent, you know, people and extremists have like co-opted this like media to kind of create like this almost artistic like framework for all of the horrible things they're doing or want to do, right? And I don't know, maybe like with how League makes people toxic, some of the toxicity that floats around in online communities and chat rooms and Twitch streams is kind of like giving people fertile grounds to express, you know, like views that are controversial, like right-wing extreme views. Yeah, I mean, you guys know that PewDiePie, for example, has been caught up in this entire like controversy over jokes he's made about Jews and his like how people on the far right kind of idolize him as like an anti-media figure. And it's because like, you know, it's an unfiltered environment that he's operating in, like video game chat rooms and stuff where like it just kind of edges you on to be more and more provocative and controversial. And soon enough, you're, you know, chatting with white supremacists and they're like hanging out with you and you didn't even realize it, right?
Interesting. Yeah, I've been thinking a little bit about like I guess the detachment from real life that I guess is kind of like implicit to video gaming, that kind of Kevin was mentioning about keyboard warriors. You know, they kind of have the protection of their screen and I guess their keyboard to prevent them from really like, I don't know, understanding real problems or what it's really like to hold a gun or whatnot. Just the word warrior makes me think of the word social justice warrior. I wonder if you guys think that's related here at all. Like, are there?
Austin's about to get us canceled. Time to not post this.
Yeah, I mean, it is touchy, but like, I mean, you know, because like the word social justice, the phrase social justice warrior is often used negatively, right? I think there's an element of like, maybe it's because like they're kind of maybe
They see themselves as
stuck behind their keyboard, but they're like not actually living it.
right, because you would be an activist if you were, right? They'd call you an activist, but when you're just like sharing posts and stuff, you're like a keyboard warrior.
Well, didn't that entire like social justice warrior phrase come out of Gamergate, which was about video games? So really,
I didn't know.
It's all related.
Yeah, I didn't know
I
that.
think
either.
so. Yeah, but that's where it got popularized on the internet, at least.
Interesting.
Yeah, I guess attaching like you just can't call anyone or anything a warrior unironically now, right? except like a soldiers who are literally risking their
Almost
lives, right?
Say
Like wounded
Don't
right?
say warriors,
Or yeah,
boys.
like a brand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um.
All right. Well, I think unless there's any other topics that you guys would like to bring up, we're kind of nearing the end of our time here. So I will.
It's been real.
Yeah. Good conversation. We'll stop the recording.
Yep.
Yeah.
It was a
Don't
good
play
one.
any violent video games.